All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour. This is the story that we've been tracking for several weeks now, and it has to do with the Ukrainian crisis after Russia has amassed over 100,000 troops along the border with eastern Ukraine. Now, in order to try and exert more pressure on Russia, the American President Joe Biden has announced that he will soon be sending a small number of American troops to Eastern Europe. And this development has come amidst a renewed push for dialogue and diplomacy from all sides involved, including Russia and Ukraine. The American Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has also shared some insights on the situation that is evolving along the eastern border with Ukraine. He has said that Russia has the military capability to act against Ukraine, and it's up to President Putin to make up his mind on what cost he intends to pay if he decides to carry out an incursion.
As you know, for months now, Russia has been deploying forces to Crimea and along Ukraine's border, including in Belarus. It has progressed at a consistent and steady pace involving tens of thousands of Russian troops. And it is being supported by increased Russian naval activity in the northern Atlantic and the Mediterranean Sea. While we don't believe that President Putin has made a final decision to use these forces against Ukraine, he clearly now has that capability. And there are multiple options available to him, including the seizure of cities and significant territories, but also coercive acts or provocative political acts like the recognition of breakaway territories.
And also the top Pentagon officials have said that there is still a lot of time for diplomacy to avoid a war. The chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, Mark Milley, has warned that the scale of destruction and also the human cost in case of a full-scale incursion by Russia into Ukraine will be horrific. The Pentagon's comments have also been reinforced by reports that Russia's military build-up along the border with Ukraine also includes supplies of blood. The disclosure by the US officials adds to the fears of the West that Russia could be preparing for a serious invasion. But there is some hope that an attack is not imminent. Meanwhile, the Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke with the French President Emmanuel Macron. In a virtual meeting, President Putin stressed that the West has not addressed the main security demands that are being put forth by Moscow. But he also insisted that Moscow is ready to negotiate and to keep negotiating. Now, Moscow's biggest demand of the Western nations has been to ensure, or rather to give a security guarantee that Ukraine will not be allowed to join an American-led military alliance, that is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that the Americans in fact lead. And this was an organization that, remember, was something that was brought into existence by the Americans as a way to counter the former Soviet Union. Now, according to the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin told Macron that he will study the responses given by Washington and NATO this week before deciding on further action. Russia, for its part, has maintained that it does not want war, but only wants security guarantees from the West that the NATO alliance, the military alliance, will not expand further in Eastern Europe. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is also stepping up some diplomatic efforts. He's set to visit Ukraine next week and also speak to President Putin. A Downing Street spokesperson has said that Johnson will urge Russia to step back from escalating the tensions further and to engage in diplomacy to avoid bloodshed in Europe. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged the Western leaders not to stir panic and not to create panic. He pointed to the need to avoid hurting Ukraine's economy, stating that these tensions that have come into existence over the course of the last few weeks has resulted in Ukrainian economy incurring some pretty heavy losses.
Із засобів масової інформації саме таке, що у нас війна, у нас ходять війська по дорогах, у нас мобілізація, люди кудись їдуть, це не так. Нам не потрібна ця паніка.
Amidst these calls for calm, the United States has sent more military equipment, including weapons and ammunition, to Ukraine. Since 2014, the United States has provided almost about $5.4 billion worth of military assistance to Kiev. The Pentagon has placed as many as about 8,500 American troops on standby for possible deployment to Europe. At this point of time, we do not know as to how many of them will be moving to Eastern Europe in the near term, as per Biden's order, as tensions remain pretty high along the border in eastern Ukraine. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.